Oh my God, that's overwhelming. And then we didn't do it. So
Okay.
where do I start if I want to get into D&D?
Well, because I guess so. I will first ask, what are you bringing to the table? Like, have you ever played it? Have you seen anything of it? Is your exposure like that first scene in Stranger Things? What do you know about D&D?
Okay, so my background is growing up Christian. D&D was
Oh,
evil.
sure, yeah,
Oh,
satanic
so
panic.
evil, so evil.
Got
I
it.
don't. I still don't understand why. But still growing up in that, I did like a role playing. I remember role playing like games with friends, like around. Like it was like we were doing like role playing games without calling it that. So we'd get really into like Power Rangers, and then I would like kind of. I remember being as an adult once I learned what D&D actually was. I was like, oh, I was doing that with my friends, where you kind of like are the person in charge, and you kind of
Right.
do that whole thing. So evil, realizing it that I was interested in it without kind of being allowed to do it. Stranger Things kind of reintroduced it back into my life a little. I hadn't thought about it, and then um, kind of just having my kids and knowing that my kids like this kind of stuff. I'm like, well, maybe this is an interesting thing that we can explore. That's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. That's I think the best place to be starting off. I think it's hard going into it when no one has done it before. I found like so I played in another game and someone else had already run it and they had done or played D&D before. So I
Okay.
kind of saw and learned a bit
Mm.
and then took that to other groups that had never played before. So I will say it's easier if at least one person has played and likely that person who has played is running the game. But for everyone or for a group that no one has played before, the benefit is you're not like you don't have any hangups or any kind of like not bad habits, but no one's really coming in with any expectations.
Hmm.
So while there are a lot of rules, I think the best way to approach it is if you. So I'm going to talk to you specifically, who's
Sure.
running the game, and then kind of just like a general framework. Actually, I'll go the other way around. General framework of what a D&D game can look like is one person who's running the game, who is generally called like a dungeon master or a game master if it's not
Yeah.
D&D, is the one who has like prepared the adventure or read the adventure ahead of time and kind of knows plot points and things, and then the players. So it's not like a 3 or 4 versus 1, but like one person has a lot of the information, the other four are either looking to get that information or add new information to it.
Hmm.
And the person, the dungeon master running the game, essentially sets it up in stages. And you could treat it like scenes, but it's basically a back and forth where you start off saying, okay, the four of you have been hired to investigate a ghost in the library. You go downstairs, it's empty, rows of books, and in the distance you see a glowing white light. What do you do? And then they respond. So it's basically kind of a call and answer
Mm.
until you at the end of the night, or you stop to have snacks. Like it's essentially you describing or the GM describing a scene, and then the players respond. With D&D, it gets a little more specific when you get into combat. So if the
Mm.
group finds the ghost and decides to fight it, then the rules change, or like it becomes a lot more structured, almost like a video game.
Mm.
Where everyone has a specific turn and you can do things on your turn. But leading up to that combat, it's essentially just, oh, I go and look through some of the books. What do I find? Or I walk towards the white light, or I turn on the lights. And then you just kind of respond to that. So
Hmm.
there's also a lot of improv to it
Mm.
too. Like you just have to kind of recognize, I don't know. And this is what we kind of talked about on the podcast. I don't know what they're going to do, but I've set up all these pieces and I will just respond based on what they do with it.
Mm.
Um, that's it in a nutshell. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I really like that. Um, I was going to ask, is there more like personal questions?
Oh, that's
So
fine too.
I guess what my question next would be like, how did you get into D&D then?
Oh, a friend of mine, and we went to high school and middle school together. His cousin, so this is that first game that I played in. His cousin wanted to play, and his name is Jason, and his cousin's name is Kevin. But Jason, my high school friend, said, my cousin is wanting to start a game. I know that you play video games and read fantasy, so like target demo for D&D. Said sure, and then we played through the starter set. We played through, I think it's called The Lost Minds of Fandelver, which,
Okay.
I mean, most of my work I don't know, the fantasy names sometimes are a real barrier to entry for me, but yeah, so we played through that starting adventure and I loved it. I immediately went, oh, this is something I didn't realize I wanted, but I'm now happy I have, because it's really just collaborative storytelling. Like it's like a video game, but that part of video games which I didn't love, which is like where you reach that invisible barrier and go, oh, this is as far as they'll let me go. And in D&D, you can go wherever you want. If the group decides, oh, we're not going to look after this ghost, we're going to go and try to rob the bank upstairs or the vault upstairs,
Yeah.
then you roll with it. And I really liked that infinite potential.
I really, really like that answer and you nailed it with video games. I like video games, but I feel like I'm always like not. It's like I don't like that. I can't just turn left. Like you want me to turn right, but I just want to see what's over there.
Right.
So I like that aspect of that you're talking about right now.
And some games, so like the starter set, I've never run the starter set. I've only played it. Essentially in the D&D world, there's kind of not two modes of thought, but like two kind of general streams of play, which is one which is more of like a railroad or like a cruise where you have like a specific narrative that everyone's kind of agreeing to follow along. You can
Yeah.
deviate for a while and you can do all these other things, but we're still kind of working towards something together.
Yeah.
And then the other being more of a sandbox where you're literally just kind of dropped into the square and you can do whatever you want. You could build, you could destroy, you could just bring your own toys and do what you want.
Yeah.
But I think if your players are used to video games, it's best to start off with something that's a bit more kind of cruise ship or like railroad. So that way they know, oh, this is kind of what I'm looking for, or I've been hired to start this adventure or to do this job. So I know we at least have a goal.
Yeah.
And as the group gets more comfortable, or as you see players start to kind of push and try to turn left when you tell them to turn right, because they will. If you say, this is your job, you're getting paid 100 gold to do it, and they say, oh, we take the gold and flee. And then it's like, oh, okay, I know what kind of game you want to play.
Okay.
But The Lost Mines is more of a cruise ship. There's detours, but it's still working towards something.
Okay. And which do you prefer? Like,
so I'm open. I find I tend to run games more than I play them. And I love playing either. Running games, I find I tend to do better at running the sandbox type games because I find if anything is possible, then I'm more prepared. Whereas I think the cruise line and like going into that starter set, which is absolutely something I would recommend if you're going to run it for your kids, or like if you're going to start playing D&D, it's a great starter. But I find if I haven't prepared enough, or if I don't remember the script, I personally don't do as well if going off script. If I know there's a script, I tend to like not having a script at all and just doing whatever I want, because then I don't have to worry about contradicting myself later or setting things up in a wrong way, or someone going, hold on, that doesn't make sense. 2 weeks ago you said this, and I'm like, oh, you're right. I'm making it up on the fly. So I tend to like running games that are more open-ended. And obviously there are still people with exclamation points over their head saying, please go kill this thing for me, or go save my parent, or whatever it is. But it's not working towards something specific. It lets the players kind of build what they want it to be. Yeah.
What should people know about D&D kind of before they get into it?
Okay, I will answer this question to the players who I've played with who were hesitant at first, or really had a specific idea, which was the like, everyone's in a basement, and there's nothing wrong with the setup. I've played in a basement with poor lighting and a lot of like unhealthy snacks, but it's really just it's essentially it's like board game night, but with a slightly different framework. So it's as much for people who just like to play together, or that you, I guess what it is if you like the people who you're playing D&D with, it'll be fine, because I think you'll know each other, you'll find the groove, and at the end of the day, it's still just kind of a group of people like playing a game together. So it's not it's not anything, I mean, like, so to your childhood, it's not anything inherently evil or full of demonic intent.
Yeah.
It's really just kind of a board game without the board and some like numbers and a lot more dice to roll. So
Yeah.
that's it.
I like that. I found that with a lot of things about my childhood.
I can't speak to that, but I can speak to D&D.
So how would you recommend someone gets into it? Where do we start?
So I would say what you've done is right, or what I would suggest, which is buying that kind of box set. I know it's J&J up in Waterloo carries it. For those who are like local to Kitchener
Yeah.
Waterloo,
Hmm.
find a game store and buy the starter pack through them, and it should have everything you need.
Hmm.
Because it's also written for first-time dungeon masters as well as first-time players.
Hmm.
So it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you at the start. Once you get done that, then it's a taller step to climb with books to buy and making characters. But that starter box set has pre-made characters to play and all of the kind of essential basics that you need to run the game.
Hmm. And then just because you have your own book coming out,
Mm-hmm.
how does that interact with like you have the starter and then what if someone wanted to get your book? How do those two marry?
Gotcha. So the Neverland role-playing game setting is leaning more towards that sandbox setting. I think you
Hmm.
could make, so I guess what it is, it's a setting that the people have finished the first adventure or the starter pack, and then it's a new kind of world or new location for their characters to go off to. Or if
Hmm.
they've never played before, they could just take new characters and get shipwrecked on an island.
Hmm.
But it's essentially everything you need in one place. It leans more towards that sandbox style of play where, all these people are doing things, or there's mermaids and pirates and Peter Pan flying around, like all these characters that are there and they have their own goals. But there's no specific single plot to follow.
Mm.
So it's about what the characters do to interact with the island. Do they befriend the pirates? Do they try to raid their ship? Like there's no right or wrong. But the book itself is structured for someone who has run a game and is open to kind of like an improvised or sandbox style of play
Mm.
where like anything could happen. It's still contained because at the end of the day, once you get to the edge of the island, it's ocean. So
Yeah.
it's not overwhelming like a whole world. It's kind of a nice microcosm, but
Oh yeah.
it's what you want it to be, railroad or sandbox.
I like that. So what's one thing that someone should know? I kind of already asked that. Is there anything? Sorry, I'm just making this up as I go along.
It's great.
Is there anything else that I would need to know before I kind of get into it?
Into D&D in general.
Yeah.
I would say the best. So I think the big thing to know is like the rules of improv kind of apply where like if
Hmm.
someone really wants to do something, it's probably best to embrace it at the
Yep.
table. And if there's someone who is really kind of trying to resist what you're trying to do, talk to them outside of it.
Hmm.
I guess so. Maybe my kind of like one step back answer is I think it's a social game, so I think it really requires an understanding of kind of like social interaction. So the players should kind of respect your energy. You should respect what they're bringing to the table. If someone is not interested in what is going on, then try to talk to them about it. Or if they're really scared of spiders, then change the monsters to snakes. Like just, I think if everyone's having a good time, I think everything else is secondary.
Hmm.
And I think that stems from understanding each other or communicating well. So I guess before you start, know that communication is a big part of it.
What about math and the dice and all that? Because that's the part that kind of intimidates me. All the imagination stuff and the sandbox and the plot, and that's all like, okay, I can get my head around that. But then it's like, okay, you have these dice. As someone who's never done it, it does seem like a little bit of like, okay, that sounds like it's a lot of details that I have to kind of manage. Tell me about that.
So I would say Yeah, I would say that is where having someone play it before would help. There are lots of videos on YouTube for if it's just like understanding the character sheet. That's a good
Hmm.
place to start. But essentially, as far as the math, what you need to know is adding and subtracting. Like that's it.
Yeah.
So it'll say to roll most of the. Okay, so you go into the basement and look for the ghost, and you try to talk to the ghost, or you try to intimidate the ghost. There's a section on the character sheet where it's like skills, and you'll have plus or minus bonuses. So you try to intimidate the ghost, roll a skill check. So they roll the d20 or the 20-sided dice,
Okay.
and then they look down the list and their intimidation is +1. So they roll a 15,
Okay.
you add the 1, and you as the dungeon master have decided they need to roll a 20 or higher because this is a scary ghost. So because they did not roll as high as that, then they are not intimidated. Or if
Mm.
you decide this is a meek, more Casper the Ghost type ghost, and they only needed to roll a 5 or higher, then they rolled higher than your 5. They intimidated the ghost. Now, how does the ghost respond? So the math is pretty minimal. There are definitely lots of dice rolls, and number adding. But at the end of the day, it's used as a launching point for
Mm.
more storytelling.
Hmm. And you're kind of quantifying like the scariness of the ghost. You're like in your head, you're like, okay, this is like a medium scary. That's like a 20. Like,
Right.
okay, I like that.
And I think, and the great thing about the starter set is it will give you those numbers. Like a lot of the
Hmm.
times it'll say, oh, they need to roll a 15 or higher to convince this person to do this. So
Hmm.
you start to get the sense of like what is an average roll, what is a hard roll, what is an easy roll
Hmm.
as you play, both as the person running it and as the characters playing in it. But the math is pretty much just looking at the dice, adding a number, subtracting a number, or just leaving it as is.
Yeah.
So there are lots of numbers and there's lots of different places to find those numbers,
Yeah.
and which dice you roll varies based off of a bunch of things. But the starter set does a pretty good job of explaining that. And the first time, I think it'll be a bit slower, and
Yeah.
I still have friends who have been playing for years and still don't know the difference between the different dice, and that's fine. You just point it out and you roll it.
Hmm.
But it's not a lot of complex math, which is why
Yeah.
I think it's great for kids as well, because it's adding and subtracting.
Hmm. Andrew, that's awesome. I feel like less intimidated by it now and kind of got my head around it. And I think I
Right.
can dive in and not disappoint my children that I told them we were going to play it, but then we didn't play it. So,
Oh yes, please tell me how it goes. And obviously for you and anyone else watching, any questions about D&D or how to run a game, or I don't understand this rule, I'm obviously a resource and I'm happy to answer any questions. The internet is also great that if you literally just type in something, it'll give you the result. It's wonderful. So yeah, we got this.
all right, perfect. Andrew, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and answering my questions about D&D. Really, really appreciate it. And like, just really great to know you. I feel like you kept me on my toes, but like in a great way. And like, it felt like a full conversation. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Great. I'm happy to be here and always happy to talk to you too. So I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much, man. I'll let you go. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. Bye.
All right. See ya.